Right, for his analysis on another sort of testy day in Canberra and the record numbers of confirmed cases of COVID in New South Wales, I'm joined from Sydney by Sky News Political Editor Andrew Clennell. Well, I feel for you, Andrew. I mean, I'm still in lockdown down here, but it's a sort of a constant state of being in Victoria. You're 7 weeks in. You've got some pretty shocking numbers out there today. What's going to happen next in Sydney?
Well, tomorrow, construction workers from the 8 or 9 hotspot areas can go back to their sites, can go back to work. So that's actually a loosening of restrictions. And there's a loophole in it, Peter, which means that if you come from another area to those hotspots, you don't have to be vaccinated. If you come from another area of Sydney, can you believe this, and go to the hotspots to work on a construction site, you don't have to be vaccinated. But if you're from those hotspots, you have to be vaccinated. And how are they going to police it all anyway? So here's my prediction, Peter, because I heard you were going to ask me for a prediction. My prediction is 500 cases a day we'll get to, and then Gladys Berejiklian will lock down hard the way I've been urging her to, and Scott Morrison has been privately urging her to for weeks. And I see a certain inevitability to this moment, because right now it's absolutely absurd that we've got the Premier getting up every day saying you can vaccinate your way out of this, and Scott Morrison saying the way out of this is the lockdown and we need close to zero as possible before we get to 80% double dose. And it's a concern for Sydney.
Let me just jump in.
Go on.
Sorry, Andrew, you finish.
Well, I think it's a concern not just for Sydney but for the nation, because you could have this two-track step out in COVID policy of Sydney and even Greater New South Wales basically letting it rip with enough vaccination, and every other state saying no COVID cases at all, thanks, despite what they're saying at National Cabinet. And I think Scott Morrison's very worried about this indeed, Peter, as he should be.
Look, I'm watching it like everyone from the outside, and I put my Victorian experience in the mix as well. I mean, we had 700 cases a day before we moved to a hard lockdown. I think the strategy in New South Wales is as clear as mud. I can't understand why you'd wait to get to 500 before you lock down even harder. What's the thinking behind that?
I wish I knew, Peter. But I'm convinced from talking to people within that government that it is polling-led and popularity-led. And Gladys Berejiklian thinks she'd be unpopular if she locks down harder. And there's also a view around the place she doesn't want to admit defeat and go the Dan Andrews route, believe it or not. Now, no one's heard us utter those words, by the way. I should stress that. But people are suspicious about that, because she's always slagging off Victoria and the Victorian approach, even today with the 17 pages of essential workers. But as I keep saying to you, there's plenty of businesses open that weren't open in Melbourne. There's plenty of traffic on the road when I come to work every day and leave work. And I think it speaks for itself in terms of that this could have been a harder lockdown. I mean, you say it's a national emergency, but you say you don't want to tighten restrictions. Well, why? Well, Gladys Berejiklian says, well, there's no evidence tighter restrictions will work. Well, what's the evidence at the moment? The reproductive rate continues to go up. Now, there were 20,000 cases in the whole Victorian outbreak. Today, we've hit 5,900. So keep getting 200, 300 a day. We're going to get there, Peter.
You absolutely are. Although I do make the point, last year, it was not supposed to be. It was the original virus, anywhere near as transmissible as Delta. 3 times we're told Delta is tougher in terms of transmissibility to what was in the community last year. The fact that you are at 356 with a bad virus, a bad variant, shows how bad things were in Victoria. To get to 700 and have a variant that's nowhere near as deadly as Delta. Just before I go, I picked up something, and this struck me as very topical and not reported widely. A lot of talk about JobKeeper, who got it, what businesses pocketed the money. I didn't hear the unions mentioned until it turns up in the media today. $22 million the unions picked up under JobKeeper. Of course, elections on the horizon. Unions are very good at donating money into the Labor Party. Is this the taxpayers, do you think, in a roundabout way, funding Labor come election day?
Well, it's interesting because, yeah, maybe. But also, the interesting thing about that is I heard Albanese interject in Question Time today saying the Liberal Party got it. to the PM, which is true, of course. The political parties actually both got JobKeeper. I'm reliably informed, Peter. So it was funding all sorts of things. It was a blunt instrument. I can see why Scott Morrison wants to move away from it. But until we get the vaccination rates up, a lot of businesses are being hung out to dry at the moment. They really are. So it's a difficult pickle for Morrison, particularly also in a political sense. And knowing him, you just wouldn't rule out a big financial support package again in the lead up to the election.
Hey, just an interesting point before I go too. I noticed at the end two things that are interesting. One, the Speaker, who's soon to retire, Liberal Tony Smith, is absolutely flexing his independence in the chair. But two, there was a motion tried on at the end of question time. You often have them, but the government gave the opposition leave to run their motion. And if I thought, looking at Anthony Albanese, he was caught pretty flat, at least for the first 5 or 6 minutes in his argument. I don't think he thought he was going to get leave. He wasn't very well prepared. What did you make of the tactics?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's crazy. You've always got to be prepared for every eventuality, don't you, in politics and government and indeed opposition. I mean, you know that from your time. So that struck me as well. And it's the second time it's occurred, Peter. When there was a motion they put up for the people of Melbourne, Albo and Miles, last year, you might recall, Morrison agreed to it, and Albanese and Miles didn't have any sort of prepared speech ready. And that's when Frydenberg got up and had his famous moment about the pain, the cost and the loss. Well, I'm up here feeling the pain and cost of the loss myself, frankly, but well, people are doing it worse than me. I should say that. But a lot of people feeling that pain. But to your point, you've got to be better than that, don't you? You've got to be ready. And particularly when it's happened to you once. So Anthony Albanese, yeah, he needs to improve on that front, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are spot on. You are to assume in opposition every single time you move those motions, you're jumping straight in a 10-minute speech. He wasn't. That's the second time he's caught out. So I think he's getting lazy in opposition. He thinks it's a foregone conclusion. Anyway, got to leave it there. Andrew Clennell, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Peter.